Greetings and salutations, the loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about this absolutely devastating news story that dropped related to conservative media, and that was via a Department of Justice indictment of two Russian nationals who are accused, among other things, of failure to register as a foreign agent, money laundering, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and of course, funneling $10 million of state Russian money into an online digital media startup known as Tenet Media that was founded by content creator and friend of the channel, Lauren Chen, and her husband. It is an absolutely devastating tale, if true, and we're going to get into that. And by the way, I actually have some inside information, or not really from inside Tenet, but just from being at certain places at certain times and overhearing certain conversations. So I definitely want to bring that information to you, and I think this video will be valuable for you guys to understand this whole controversy. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody out there in the audience for supporting this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
By the way, actualjusticewarrior.com/join is not funded by the Russians. Now, all joking aside, I do want to talk about Lauren Chen in the open of this because I don't come at this from an unbiased perspective. I've talked about on this channel repeatedly that Lauren Chen has been incredibly helpful to me personally in terms of helping me monetize this channel, and I want to make this clear that she was the kind of person behind the scenes who would help a lot of people. You guys have seen me do live events before where I'm debating and whatnot. Well, the person who actually introduced me to the organizers of those live events, the majority of them, was in fact Lauren Chen. A while ago, years ago, she reached out to me via direct message, sent me a ticket to a live event that was actually happening near me. I believe it was a Tim Minds event or a Tim Myth Informed event. And when I got there, she got me a VIP pass back into the green room so that I could meet the organizers. And from that point on, I was being invited to those events as a speaker. And I actually met some really solid, great people through that whole process when I was having trouble monetizing my channel and I got reached out to by a multi-channel network. Lauren actually recommended this person because he was a rep for her. And by the way, this was well before she was even at Blaze, much less Russia Today. And she told me that they work hard in order to get you sponsors. And for about 2 years, those in-video ad reads represented about half of my income. And again, she did that just out of the kindness of her heart. She also ended up getting me my first booking on Timcast IRL. She's the one who knew the producer. She said I would be a great guest to come on. And so years ago, when I appeared on that show, that was due to her. And also, on top of that, when she comes and visits New York City, me and my then fiance, now wife, would take her out to dinner. When I visited Tennessee in June of this year, she took us out to dinner. And when I was planning my wedding, which I didn't invite a lot of people from the digital media space to that wedding, the first person on the list for me and my wife was Lauren Chen and her husband. So these are people that I actually care about. These are people that I like. These are people who behind the scenes go out of their way to help people. And unfortunately, according to this indictment, that trust that they gave off through their actions over years may have been the very thing that ended up ensnaring a bunch of these different content creators into these deals that were actually just from a company that was a front for Russia. So if true, it's absolutely devastating, not only in terms of the reputations of those creators, but for me, on a personal level, because they have always been good to me. So there is not a story that I've covered on this channel before where I've hoped for it to be false more than this one. Those are my biases. Those are out on the table for you guys to understand. I definitely don't want them to face criminal charges, to be 100% clear about that. But from this point on, we go through the indictment, we look at the evidence, and we have to talk about it in as objective a way as humanly possible. So, right off the top, you have two Russian nationals. These people worked for RT. Apparently, Lauren would have met them, again, according to the indictment, when she was working at RT. But after the Russia-Ukraine invasion of February 2022, when the US started sanctioning Russians and sanctioning Russian money, RT shut down its operations formally in the United States of America. And this is where the conspiracy ends up coming in, because according to the indictment, in order to avoid sanctions, in order to avoid all the restrictions, restrictions, they ended up setting up a bunch of different various shell companies and used Tenet Media, which was something that they set up with Lauren Chen and her husband Liam, as a method to still influence the United States of America, but in a covert way. Now, of course, this ends up triggering the money laundering charges. This also triggers the failure to register as a foreign agent charges, and all these different other various problems that are now, of course, visited upon these two Russians, who are the only two indicted at this point, but could eventually trickle down to Lauren and her husband, and of course, the reputational harm that we see for the content creators that were involved in this situation. Now, to be clear, when you read the indictment, the Department of Justice is not accusing any of these content creators of knowing that they were receiving Russian money. In fact, the 6 people that were employed at Tenet, and by the way, the reason people knew this was Tenet is because it was a Tennessee-based corporation when it was incorporated. The number of content creators, or as they are called in the indictment, commentators that the indictment says were listed on their website, and the fact that one of the 6 commentators has she, her pronouns, and of course, one of the 6 content creators for Tenet Media is a woman. So this is how people figured it out, for those of you who are confused about that. But essentially what this alleges is that Lauren and Liam, who are founder 1 and founder 2, use their position of trust that they've earned over the course of years to deceive people into signing up for contracts that they believed were from this new startup company that was funded by a French guy who is either a billionaire or a millionaire who didn't actually exist, when in reality they were using Russian money in order to sow discord in the United States of America. Now, there are a ton of lies from the left-wing media about this, that Tenet Media was overly focused on Ukraine, foreign policy, and all of that, and that's just not the case. If you watch any of these videos, a bunch of these creators don't even talk about foreign policy all that much, and it says quite clearly early on in the indictment that they were talking about a number of hot-button issues, and again, the reason for that was to generally sow discord within America in order to create division. By the way, this is very similar to what Russia Today used to do when they were in the United States of America operating legally, which was hire people that are left, right, it doesn't matter, their variance in views, as long as they're generally West skeptical or anti-establishment. That was what they were looking for. And there is no evidence at all whatsoever that any of the creators known as commentators in this indictment were paid to spell out specific narratives or anything like that, because that's not how these campaigns work. The way these work is you don't pay somebody to change their mind, you pay somebody and boost somebody that already aligns with you on certain key issues. And I want to address something from the indictment, and this, of course, is this February 15th thing about how they wanted them to post this Tucker Carlson video at a grocery store, and it is a message between the 2 founders and the producer. And I just want to make it clear that anybody saying that this is the content creators, or as Cenk Uygur said, this is Tim Pool receiving $100,000 in order to post this Tucker Carlson video.
Yeah, here's the encouragement. You're going to get $100,000 when you post that video. That's all the encouragement you need. And so, look, if you wonder, hey, this weirdo Tucker Carlson video in a Russian grocery store telling us how the Russians are so much better off than the Americans and we should be more like the Russians, why is that everywhere? Well, this is part of the reason why it's everywhere. Because they're telling people, hey, get that out there. Tell everybody that the Russians are the best and America sucks. And they're like, oh, I'm getting paid $100,000. Oh, yeah. Oh, look at that. The Russian grocery stores are the best. Look at Tucker Carlson telling us how great they are. And the Ukrainians suck and America sucks. And we got to make it great again because America's so bad. But Russian grocery store, they're amazing. Give me the check. Give me the check.
Is completely wrong, just making stuff up, because all of the content creators are labeled commentators 1 through 6 throughout the course of the indictment. On top of that, the conclusion of this February 15th exchange is that the producer agrees to post it the next day. And where does it show up the next day? on Tenet Media's Twitter account. Obviously, the producers, or that label in the indictment, refers to actual staff for Tenet Media, not the actual commentators nor their staff. And again, this tweet is still up. I'll show it to you right now so you can see it for yourself. Now, to be fair, there is another incident from this indictment that people are also highlighting, and this refers to the March 22nd, 2024 terror attack at a Moscow music festival, in which it appears that the Russians wanted one of the commentators to blame the United States or U.S. intelligence for this particular attack. And when I looked up on social media if this video was made, I found people claiming that this Benny Johnson video, by the way, Benny Johnson is commentator 3, was the video that actually was the one that was requested. And it reads as follows in the headline: massive terror attack rocks Russia, Moscow in flames, total lockdown, U.S. intel predict attack, ! And this is dated March 22nd of 2024. So this would seem like a pretty straight up example of the Russians actually getting one of the commentators through, again, Lauren and Liam, Founder 1 or Founder 2, to cover this specific story. And they asked specifically for the US-Ukraine angle. That being said, it appears that on March 23rd, 2024, the request was put in, which would be after Johnson's video. Now, this could very easily be a typo in the indictment, so I don't want to make too much of it, but this would be the example that people could go to, which is Benny Johnson covering this story, and this could be an issue of time zones or whatever changing the dates. So that is the example that could be a thing. And by the way, I will link Benny's full video in the description of this video. And again, I didn't say that this was the one. There could be an additional video that's worse than this one that came out the 23rd that maybe was deleted post this indictment being revealed to the public. So leave those possibilities open. Now, this would be the example that a lot of people on Reddit have claimed is the Russian influence one. But again, I will also point out in Johnson's defense that this is not a Tenet Media video. This is a Benny Johnson video, and according to the dates, this is something that he was already covering on his own channel. So you take this however you want. You want to say typo in the DOJ report, time zone issue messing up the dates, or do you want to say that maybe this is just not the video and Benny Johnson just already has those opinions, which is why he was hired in the first place? Up to you. Now, the next thing that cracks me up about this particular story is all the different clips that people are bringing from Tim Pool in order to make the case that he's saying or doing this because of the fact that he's being paid by Russia. Now, to be clear, according to this indictment, none of these creators knew, and there is no evidence that any of these creators knew that they were being funded by the Russian government. And in fact, the indictment says the opposite. It says that the founders, who are Lauren and Liam, deceived them into thinking they were being funded by some rich guy from France. Now, there are a ton of clips of Tim Pool that are circulating online where he is very anti-Ukraine, and people are using this as proof positive of the Russians paying him to say that. But so you guys understand, what Tim Pool had licensed by Tenet Media was his show called The Culture War. So a bunch of these clips either are before the Tenet Media deal or not the Culture War segments, so they're just his normal, ordinary appearances. In fact, one of the clips that has gone viral is somebody claiming that Tim Pool was lying when he said that he didn't have any investors to Emma Vigeland, and this was in a June 23rd episode of The Culture War. And as somebody who was on that episode, I can tell you that this was 100% true at the time. In fact, this Culture War episode is up on Tim Pool's YouTube channel. The reason why it's up on Tim Pool's YouTube channel is because he had not signed the deal with Tenet at this moment in time, and it is ridiculous to assert otherwise. On top of that, in this very Culture War episode, Tim and I got into an argument about Ukraine, and unsurprisingly, he held the same positions that he would later hold when he was signed up with Tenet Media. On top of that, when I was there after this show, I learned about this startup company that Lauren Chen was running, and at that moment in time, Tim was actually rejecting the offer that they were giving him because he said it was a crappy offer. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail behind the scenes, but one of the things that I happened to overhear is that Lauren Chen wanted to come down within the next 2 weeks in order to negotiate in person with Tim. Well, guess what? If you look at the Timcast IRL podcast, what you will find is a July 6th episode of their podcast where Lauren is, of course, in studio. And this is exactly probably when they worked out when the deal was signed. On top of that, when you go to the indictment, page 19 and section 29, what you will find out is that on or about June 21st, 2023, they are still negotiating the contract with Commentator 1 and Commentator 2. It says right here, such as hiring of staff, contract negotiations with contributors, including Commentator 1 and Commentator 2, and payments to the U.S. company and commentators. So they're still working on the deals 2 days prior. By the way, this is on or about June 21st. So my hearing that Tim was not happy and Lauren was going to come in to negotiate the deal in a week or two, and that coinciding with an appearance on IRL lines up perfectly. On top of that, Tim said that he had no investors at this moment in time, and even post the Tenet media deal, even though clearly and obviously this was before the Tenet media deal, that was also true, because when you sell or license a show to a company, that is not the same thing as an investor holding stake in your company. Now look, if evidence comes out in the future that shows otherwise, I will correct the record and change my mind. But the fact of the matter is, all these different misleading clips and all these people trying to use this indictment, but actually not use information from the indictment to attack their political opponents, distracts from the primary issue, which is a bunch of people in conservative media, some of them that I know personally, some of them that have quite literally refused to work with Russia today and the Russians in the past, despite the fact that they were offered generous contracts, were allegedly tricked into working for the Russians inadvertently, and they have to suffer the reputational damage for that. And that happens to be absolutely disgusting in every possible way. And again, if true, it's hard for me to reconcile that with the image of both Lauren and her husband that I have in my mind. I mean, while all the focus appears to be on Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and Dave Rubin, the fact of the matter is they're going to be perfectly fine. Matt Christensen, who, by the way, I actually did an appearance on his live stream. It might be one of maybe 2 times I've ever spoken to him, but I'm pretty sure it's just one. He actually ended up selling his previous home based on his Tenet deal, moving into a new home, and now he's completely out of luck. And he said in his live stream that he had already made financial decisions based on his contract, and now it's been completely blown up because the funding, the financing, and all that was way sketchier than he was led to believe. You have Lauren Southern, who has had so many problems throughout her life with being associated with wrong people, with being harassed by her government and all that, being harassed by other governments, who is now under the scrutiny of the Canadian government because there was a tweet from a politician that said that any Canadian citizens, which by the way, Lauren and Liam are also Canadian citizens, but also Lauren Southern is a Canadian citizen, will be put under scrutiny for this. So now she might be in jeopardy despite the fact that she would not willingly work for the Russians. So it's absolutely devastating in that regard. And that doesn't even mention somebody like Taylor Hanson, who Tenet Media was really a big break for him, because prior to this, and I apologize for bringing this up, Taylor, I know you're a good guy and I hope you're doing well, he could not support himself through his content. So he was dependent on that. And that doesn't even mention all the behind the scenes staffers that probably didn't know any of this was going on, who thought that they had a relatively secure job in terms of how secure you can be in digital media, that had it blow up in their face. These people have families and all that. And again, them being misled by somebody in a position of trust within the community is absolutely devastating. Now, there's a lot of disingenuous and dumb people out there who say, oh, well, how come they didn't know? How come they didn't find it suspicious that Tim Pool was being paid $100,000 per Culture War episode, even though that would be the going rate for Tim Pool, because just think about how much money the guy actually makes. Remember, we did a video on the beef between Tim Pool and former co-host Adam Krigler, and during the course of their back and forth, which I believe was late last year, it was revealed that when Krigler was on the show back in 2019-2020, the Timcast IRL podcast was generating something like $25,000 of income or revenue per episode. So if they're generating $25K 4 years ago, what do you think they could possibly generate if Tim left that on his channel today with a new show that he was starting up that, at least on Tim's channel, was doing absolutely wonderful in terms of numbers and super chats? It's going to be a lot of money. So $100,000 to license an episode, again, is not a suspicious number when you understand the digital media space. On top of that, it is typical for investors to overpay for talent in order to launch their network, in order to build it out to a broad audience, even though they don't expect an immediate return on that investment. Fox News, 5 years of complete unprofitability invested in by Rupert Murdoch before it really got off the ground. And a bunch of these other companies are like that, including The Blaze. Again, they weren't profitable for years. So this is not surprising. By the way, Vice does this, BuzzFeed does this, all these different companies do this, and we all laugh at the layoffs later on, but that was a part of the plan to try to build out and produce as much as possible, reel in an audience, then trim back later and try to become profitable. So anybody who's telling you that works in digital media is either completely ignorant of their own industry or is lying to you. But on top of that, it is not surprising for a conservative media startup to be funded by some billionaire. And the fact that they sent a name and a profile over and people couldn't find information on him, again, is not all that suspicious. We think of billionaires as like Mark Cuban or Warren Buffett or Elon Musk or Bill Gates or the ones that you know. But the fact of the matter is most billionaires are pretty anonymous. They're pretty hard to find, especially European billionaires. They don't want their name and their face out there. And again, there have been media reports where they try to cover a scandal related to a billionaire and they don't have a single, or maybe they just have one photo of said billionaire. So this is, again, not an uncommon thing. Like, who has heard of the people who funded Daily Wire prior to the fact that they funded Daily Wire? So them not being able to find information on a foreign billionaire, to me, is not that surprising when you understand that not every billionaire has a forward-facing public image, and a lot of them work diligently in order to make sure that they can remain relatively anonymous. Now, when you acknowledge that reality, that the payments involved in this particular situation were actually pretty standard for the content creators that they were paying, and the fact that the billionaire is not somebody who is well known to them is actually not that suspicious, and you still say, you know what, I don't like the idea of these people taking money from a foreign investor to talk about US politics, even if they believe that to be a French billionaire, then I would say that's a completely fair play. I would say that then at that moment, you have some fair criticism if you want to go in that direction. Although I will point out that a bunch of different media outlets, including mainstream media outlets, have foreign shareholders, foreign stakeholders, and all that. For me, the main problem in this particular story and the main issue that people should be focusing on is the alleged deception against the content creators and, of course, these foreign actors, the Russians, trying to subvert U.S. law and whatever involvement that trusted content creators had in that process. But for the left, the goal of this story is the same goal that they always have, which is to smear their political opponents as disingenuous, horrible people that are just evil in every possible way and have been paid to change their minds or whatever, even though that's not how these operations tend to work. And by the way, one of the reasons, again, why I'm actually very sympathetic to the content creators in this particular situation is that based on what I know and based on the fact that I had a lot of trust for Lauren and Liam, if they would have made me a decent offer with the levels of creative freedom that these content creators all told me well before this controversy that they had at Tenet Media, then I might have considered joining up on that based on these parameters. Now, I didn't get an offer like that, which, I mean, you could at least pay me in your scheme. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying, so that way when it all blows up, I have a bunch of money in my pocket. But the fact is, I can understand how being put in that position with the big dollar amount, again, not talking about Tim, Benny, or Dave, talking about the other three creators, that I might have joined in on that. Again, based on trust and based on the fact that it is no more suspicious than other conservative media startups that I've heard about in the past. Now, with all that being said, with all that being clarified for you guys out there in the audience, I want to highlight my absolute favorite part of this indictment, which of course is this wire transfer for $318,000 that was supposedly being used to buy an iPhone 15 Pro Max 512 gigabyte version. Now, the reason I like this transaction being listed in the indictment so much is because for $318,000, you can't even get the 1 terabyte version. I mean, come on, guys. If you're trying to not raise suspicion, this is something that obviously you want to make sure you're getting the 1 terabyte version for. I don't know. This just jumped out to me, along with a couple of other things in the indictment. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the more serious elements of this because there is another issue that has popped up, and that, of course, is the nuking of Tenet Media's YouTube channel, Lauren Chen's YouTube channels, including her movie review channel from the platform of YouTube, and people are saying that it's really messed up. In fact, there was a tweet from Matt Orfella, or whatever his name is, I apologize for the mispronunciation, where he compared this to the R. Kelly situation, where YouTube waited for him to be convicted, even though he was accused of much more serious crimes than money laundering, in order to delete his channel. But in this particular case, Matt is pointing out that Lauren has just been accused of something by the DOJ, and that was enough for YouTube to delete her channel, which is her primary source of income, especially when you realize that Tenet Media's channel was also deleted, so they're not going to be pulling in any money from the corporation. And I just want to fact check that right quick, because according to this indictment, the only two people that are being indicted, aka formally accused of a crime, are the two Russians. So technically, Lauren got her channel deleted based on people figuring out that she was one of the unnamed people, again, founder 1 or founder 2, in that indictment. And that, to me, is absolutely insane. The Department of Justice can essentially destroy you by not actually alleging a crime that you would have potentially even committed. Again, there may be an additional indictment of them in the future. I hope that that is not the case in the future. But the fact of the matter is, she's not even technically accused of anything criminal, and she just lost all of her channels just based on the fact that this was put out into the public, and people were able to figure out who these anonymous people were, or who these people who are unnamed, supposedly to protect their identities, were in this particular indictment. And that is shameful in my opinion. Now, some people are furiously typing in the comments of this video that YouTube is a private company and they can do whatever they want, as if that addresses any point that I just made. Do you understand that private companies sure can do things that they want to do, but that does not mean you can't criticize them for doing that thing? That doesn't mean that you can't compare and contrast how they treat one category of person versus another person who, again, is not even formally accused of a crime by the Department of Justice as of right now. This is an absolutely devastating precedent. And by the way, if it is true that Lauren and Liam misled these content creators, the fact of the matter is they put them in this position for their channels to get deleted based on the association, and that is also a horrible thing to do. So this is not me just going out of my way looking for a way to bend and twist in order to defend people that I've considered friends in my life. I do feel horrible for them. I do find this to be a very sketchy precedent. But to be clear, this is also something that if it is later proven to be true, whatever allegations that are brought against them, which by the way are technically not criminal charges as of right now, It is worse because they would have put other people in that position to have their entire income, their entire means of defending themselves be deleted at the drop of a hat. I mean, really think about this. Most people in mainstream media are running with the idea that all of these content creators willingly took Russian money in order to change their positions to promote Russia versus Ukraine, even though the majority of them don't talk about foreign policy. I showed you that clip from Jank where he was just not telling you the truth about Tim being paid $100,000 to post something on Twitter, even though clearly and obviously he is one of the commentators in the indictment, not one of the producers. Well, throughout the whole course of that segment, he said that all of these people got paid $100,000 per video, and almost all of their videos were attacking Ukraine and pro-Russia.
Keep it real. You didn't know. Okay, guys, one last thing. So it's not like the videos were like, hey, here's one on the Philippines, here's one on Brazil, here's one on Russia, here's one on healthcare, here's one on gun control, etc. No, they were all pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian, pro-Trump, by the way. So you couldn't put two and two together? That was a giant mystery to you? And you're the victims? No, brothers and sisters, you got $100,000 a video. You ain't no goddamn victim.
When in reality, according to the indictment, almost all of their videos had nothing to do with even foreign policy. And anybody who watched Tenet Media or knows these creators knows that most of their videos don't have anything to do with foreign policy. Most of the Culture War episodes had absolutely nothing to do with foreign policy. So that's just made up. But most people believe that to be true. Most people believe that to be what happened. So YouTube could nuke all of these creators that are in this indictment that are supposedly unnamed in order to protect their identity, even the ones that are the victims of this deception, again, according to this very same DOJ indictment. So that is a dangerous precedent. It is something to worry about. It is something to be concerned about. Now, with all that being said, if what is alleged in this DOJ indictment is true, and I'm not just talking about the criminal charges against the two Russians, but the idea that Lauren and her husband misled these content creators into signing up for these deals based on the fact that they likely knew they wouldn't sign up to work for the Russians, then that is devastating news. And regardless of whether or not they face criminal charges, it's going to destroy their credibility, destroy their trust, and basically make it impossible for them to work in digital media with anybody in the future. It's an absolute reputational killer. And to be clear, if they lied to these people, as is alleged in the indictment, then it is a deserved reputational killer. The fact is, you put all these different people at risk for what? For the Russian government because they paid you money? Like, that's crazy to me. And especially when you consider the fact that while Tim, Dave Rubin, and Benny Johnson got over $9 million combined, they only got paid $760,000 in order to do this. Now, there's a lot of people saying that, oh, they betrayed the United States of America and all that. But to be clear, these people are Canadian citizens, so they can't betray a country that they're not citizens of. But the fact of the matter is, it is quite disturbing and it is upsetting. And I've already explained the personal reasons for that. But the fact is, I also have personal connections to people on the content creator side of this, people that I care about over there, people who are behind the scenes. And for them to be out of a job so suddenly because of this scandal and not know what to do when they thought they had a legit secured income is also just horrible. It's just devastating. It is really unfortunate. And that is really who I feel for in this particular case. Again, your major content creators, your Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, who had already left Tenet, by the way, Benny Johnson, they're going to be perfectly fine. Lauren Southern, I'm hoping that the Canadian government doesn't use this as an excuse to crack down on her, but if not, she's a big enough name that she's going to be okay. Matt Christensen will rely on his audience, and I'm sure they will support him. Taylor Hanson, I hope he gets another job. I want him to be fine, but there's a bunch of producers and people behind the scenes that who knows where their next paycheck is going to come from. And I know that that is something that regular, ordinary Americans experience all the time. But the fact of the matter is, usually you don't experience this because your boss was lying to you about who invested in his company and is going to potentially face criminal charges to which you may be implicated in some degree in this thing, and all these different media outlets are writing about this. I mean, it's not technically the same thing, but I want to know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. As usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about absolutely devastating news for conservative media. Till next time.